So it's Hispanic Heritage Month, and by the time you watch this video, there's either a few days left of it or none at all. Irrespective of that, I've been wanting to celebrate the work of one of my favourite filmmakers on this channel for years now. His name is Alejandro Iñárritu. He's the man behind two of my all-time favourite movies, and today I want to hone in on one of those, that film being Amores Perros. Iñárritu's presentation of Mexico is one of inherent violence. It's the way he views his nation. His intention with this film is to never caricature, instead presenting space and characters from a hyper-realistic perspective. This relates to the pervasive presence of violence and its consequences as a defining characteristic of contemporary life in his native city. Iñárritu doesn't discard the beauty of Mexico and the pride he has of being a Mexican, but he certainly explores the underbelly of the nation aptly and accurately. In interviews, Iñárritu has dubbed Amores Perros' Mexico as a violent place, mentally and physically, and one that is about to be overcome by his character's animalistic nature. The director, along with his trusty cinematographer Rodrigo Prieto, utilizes short focal lengths to highlight this perspective. The repetition of short focal lengths and wide angles in each episode of this multi-protagonist film allows us as the audience to make a connection between the stories beyond thematic devices. We are literally piecing all three stories together purely based on the ways in which they are visually presented to us. The wide angles create separation, the extreme close-ups force us to find an emotional connection to whichever character is in question. When I say repetition though, I don't mean it in a nauseating way. The shots are presented to us differently, they just happen to be similar in execution. This inherently allows Iñárritu to reinforce the idea that his version of Mexico is one that doesn't allow its people to breathe. Though they may be walking different lives, they're all walking in the same direction. In Amores Perros, that direction is death and danger. The wide angles often distort filmic space, which is contributed to by the dehumanizing violence, be that an explosive car crash or aggressive dogfighting. These wide angles keep us at arm's length, but we're still close enough to almost feel everything. That's the beauty of Iñárritu's movies, I find. He doesn't hold your hand through the story, nor does he drop you in uninvited. You're almost forced to experience and feel the picture, but unable to actually help his characters. It creates a genuine emotion, one of desperation and inherent sadness. Amores Perros, his debut feature, is a hallmark in the director's style and aesthetic. These wide, handheld angles offer up a feeling of explosiveness. At any minute, something crazy can happen. Remember when I said that Iñárritu repeats these shots across all three stories? Look at how he frames Octavio's humble house, now the expensive upmarket home of Valeria, and then Chivo's dilapidated basement. Despite the economic disparity between all three and the inherently different characters inhabiting them, there's still this palpable feel of danger. It ties back into Iñárritu's vision of Mexico, one where his characters are all on different paths but ultimately walking in the same direction. I actually want to focus the bulk of this essay on all three houses of our titular characters, purely because the way in which Iñárritu frames them is not only fascinating, but telling of the story itself. So let's rewind back to the first story. Octavio, his brother, Ramiro, Susana, her baby and their mother all inhabit these small walls. The house is far too small, yet instead of showing this cramming, Iñárritu opts to frame almost everything with an establishing shot. Despite this supposed family being together, Iñárritu's camera tells us all we need to know about them. They're disjointed, disconnected, and distanced from one another. The only time we switch to extreme close-ups are in moments of loudness and aggression. It is here where Iñárritu decides to involve more characters in the shot, which is kind of ironic, right? After all, an extreme close-up dictates that only one character fills the screen. Not in Amores Perros, or at least not in this house. Close-ups are often punctuated by characters behind our subject, blurred and foggy but still watching, ever present. It adds to the claustrophobia of this house. I love this shot right here. Notice how Iñárritu's camera tells the entire story. He toys with the short focal length to distort the foreground and the background. What does this do? It creates the idea of an illicit desire between Susana and Octavio. You then have Ramiro pacing, too narcissistic and self-absorbed to notice what's happening, and then the mother standing afar but overlooking them as if she is aware of their illicit desires. Notice too how the objects surrounding them seem big and aplenty, almost as if they represent these physical barriers between human communication in this household. Although the wide angle appears to give the room an allure of size and space, what dominates is the notion of a fragmented family. Toward the end of this story, the short focal length and wide angle combine to amplify the feeling of desperation. It actively distorts the facial features of Octavio and his mother as he realizes that Susana and Ramiro have left the country. The scene ends with a long shot of Octavio peering out of the window. Iñárritu opts for a handheld version of this shot in the final cut, the shaking representing this imminent explosion of frustration and violence. The house suddenly looks huge and empty in spite of its minuscule size. What does this all mean? Iñárritu's wide angle has both expanded and contracted this space. The breathing of this version of Mexico and its characters is represented through the shifting of Octavio's house. Iñárritu's camera in this first story constructs a space that cramps the characters in tiny interiors, impairs their personal and social progress, and surrounds them with an air of inevitability and foreboding from which they are unable to escape. Let's move on to the second story, the one that revolves around Valeria, a famous model, and her wealthy husband Daniel. When the story begins, the wide angles are no longer, stability has returned to the screen. We are imbued with this feeling of air, our characters are finally breathing, they're living comfortably. But the moment we see Valeria's house for a second time, much later in the story, the wide angles have returned, and so has she, this time in a wheelchair, her career shattered. The haunting wide, high angle shot of Valeria laying impotent on the bed is almost entrancing. She's about to find out that her contract has been cancelled and her modelling career is essentially over. As this horror reaches her ear, this spacious, luxurious apartment now feels like a claustrophobic cage. Iñárritu's suffocating of his characters returns. Once again, it speaks of his vision of Mexico, one of an abandonment of humanity and a lack of hope. Everything is restricted. There's a moment in this story though, before Valeria's accident, where the model and her husband quickly walk toward the window to overlook a billboard of her modelling campaign. We think nothing of this shot, I suppose it's a sweet moment between a couple. Iñárritu later returns to this moment after Valeria has had her leg amputated, though this time it feels torturous. Her journey from the door to the window is longer, emphasized by the editing and the change in focal length. The distance between the door and the window is unimaginably different to the first time we see it. Iñárritu effectively switches focal lengths to emphasize the hopelessness of this Mexico and the people that inhabit it. The model's identity was once all about image and beauty, but now the billboard is blank. Iñárritu's camera, now pulled back, gives the house the aesthetic of a tunnel, one from which there is no end in sight. The thing is though, I mentioned that there is beauty in Iñárritu's Amores Perros, and perhaps I haven't done that justice, so I think it's worth pointing out that despite providing us with a somewhat haunting shot of Daniel and Valeria, you can see that the two are now truly in love. Their passion for one another is no longer cosmetic. That brings us to El Chivo, the final story and the one that unites it all. Once again, Iñárritu's wide angle haunts the audience. This time, it's the conversation between El Chivo and Gustavo, eager to murder his half-brother, accompanied by a friend. The three talk about planning out this murder, but the wide angle never changes. Even between establishing shots, close-ups and the like, the entire scene is shot on a wide angle. It highlights the distance between the two in an almost fantastical manner. The short lens gives this scene a grotesque aesthetic, almost as though Iñárritu's Mexico is smiling and applauding at this plan of murder and rage. Any hopes of communication and community in this society is rapidly slipping away. the visuals only work to aid that notion, since a normal focal length would have appeared closer to the characters with less of a distance to digest and view the actions of this society through a distorted prism. The wide angle is often a product of contemporary cinema and used without much power, but in the hands of Iñárritu and his cinematographer Prieto, it immediately becomes a tool that totally reshapes this world and story, and it effectively constructs an urban space that is strongly unified not in humanity, but instead violence and pervasive danger. Amores Perros is a tough watch and a bitter pill to swallow, but behind its powerful images is a visionary, a true master of the camera. Hey guys, thanks so much for watching this video, and thank you for allowing me the chance to celebrate Hispanic Heritage Month on the channel. I just want to let you guys know that if you head over to Audiences Everywhere, I've got a lot of my work featured there. I've been talking about Hispanic Heritage Month since September. We've got pieces on Miles Morales, we've got pieces on Spanish horror movies, El Mariachi, Robert Rodriguez, Hispanic filmmakers you should know, just a whole bunch of stuff. So honestly, if you want to check that out, I'll leave a link in the description. I'll put something up on the screen now. Also, if you want to support the channel on Patreon, I can no longer put up annotations because YouTube's being a dickhead again, and now creators can't really put up their annotations of Patreon. It's a long story, so if you want to support the channel, the link's now in the description, and yeah, thanks for watching.